This is the Brandon Smith Show. I'm your host, Brandon Smith, and the entire purpose of this show is one singular thing, and that is to help you live a life that much more free from dysfunction. So today we're going to talk about dysfunction, but we're going to talk about how to eliminate it at the culture level. One of my favorite topics. I am a huge culture geek, so we're going to talk about culture. And so to help us with that conversation, I've got my good friend, David Shanklin, joining us via Skype. David, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. Great to be here.
Yeah, super glad to have you here. So I see the New York City skyline behind you.
Yeah, more or less. Taking it through the
more or less.
Yeah.
And so, David, I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more about your story and how you and I have gotten connected. But you right now I've got your info in front of me, and I love it. I mean, just the title of what you do is so cool. Head of Culture Strategy at CultureIQ, where you specialize.
We made it up.
I love that. I mean, why not? That's like super cool. So tell us a little bit about what you do at CultureIQ, and then tell us about how you got doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So CultureIQ exists in the world to partner with organizations to make culture a competitive advantage. So I think we'll probably talk about that quite a bit today. What that means in my role and for my team is we really work with our clients to understand not only the people side of their business, but the business side of their business, and something I've learned a lot from you on over the years for sure. And we work with them end to end to understand their business, how it links to their culture, and then do a lot of custom assessment and survey design, building off of our core model. And then we use our cloud-based software to administer employee feedback surveys and get employee feedback and input. And then we work through all that data and analyze it and help leadership teams figure out what to do with it and how to strengthen their cultures.
So you really help companies try and get some data around what is this thing when we talk about culture, like how do you measure it and how do you improve on it?
Yeah, we do our best to make something that's notoriously pretty soft into a quantitative metric and a number. And we have a value here, respect data and make human decisions. So we really believe it's about both sides of the equation, and that number really helps facilitate the conversation in unique ways. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to doing the right thing for your people.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit. And well, actually, before I ask you this question, how'd you get doing this?
That's a great question. You know, I guess my journey starts actually back in college and doing a cross-country cycling trip to raise funds and awareness for people with disabilities, and had an amazing experience doing that, and came back to lead the trip a couple of years later. And that just really, for me, showed the impact a leader can have on their team, and really the great responsibility and privilege it is to lead a group of people. And from there, I kind of, I worked for the nonprofit for a couple of years, and then decided I wanted to get my MBA. And my first year of MBA, a guy named Brandon Smith came in and talked to
crazy guy.
Talked to my
guy's
work
nuts.
management class. Yeah. And I said, oh yeah, I want to do that. That's what it is. It was this really cool blend of consulting work, but also very focused on the people side of business. So from there, I went on to spend some time doing consulting with Deloitte, some internal leadership development succession work, and finally found a home at Great Place to Work where I could focus on culture all the time. Did that for a couple of years, and then came over to CultureIQ about 2 years ago to lead our culture strategy team.
Super cool, man. And you're a new dad. You're a new papa.
Yep. My son turned 8 months a weekend or two ago. So doing that whole exploration, it's another learning experience, but certainly has been a great one.
Yeah, man. All right. So under our topic of culture, I think it's probably helpful to try and define that. So when you talk to clients and clients say, David, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean by culture? How do you guys define that?
Yeah, so I think the definition you get so often for culture is how things get done in an organization. And at CultureIQ for us, that leaves out a really important piece of the puzzle, which is how and why things get done. in an organization. And when you really dig into a lot of the history of the topic of culture, it goes back to, there's a lot of anthropologists and, looking at society, so culture out in the world, and it's just applied in an organizational context. And I guess this is the nerdy part of our discussion, right, Brandon? This is is where everyone else's eyes are glazing over.
That's why they get to look at me, because I'm funny looking. Gives them something to stare at while we talk about geeky stuff.
Hit the bobblehead on Dwight over there. something to watch. But that why we feel like is so important. And in most people have seen a culture model with an iceberg on it. And you're like, okay, yeah, it's really deep and there's all this stuff under the surface. But those underlying assumptions are so powerful in impacting the ways that we behave. And they're so impactful to that how work gets done. You just can't ever forget that why piece of culture if you really want to impact it. So whenever I get asked that question about what's the definition, I always like to point out that why and how important it is to pay attention to it.
So we've got people listening right now that are leaders in various ways. So they could be leaders of a whole organization, or they could be leaders of a team, and they want to make their culture work. What are some good starting tips that you could give them? What are some things that either they need to pay attention to or things they could start doing?
Yeah. So I think it all starts with mindset. Your mindset as a leader, and the best thing you can do as a leader is listen and ask for feedback. So in order to do that, you really have to have that mindset of humility and be ready for that feedback. And I mean, I'll speak from personal experience, reviewing my own results, reviewing results for CultureIQ and other places I've worked. And you've seen it, right, with leaders that you've worked with and probably experienced it yourself. Sometimes the data that comes back is challenging. But that best first step is really listening and trying to appreciate what folks are telling you when you ask them for their opinion on your leadership and on what it's like to work for you and work at your organization, and then really listening to what's in there and the incremental steps you can take to get better.
So really, just first of all, you got to be open. You got to be open to the feedback and be willing to hear it, and not only take it but hear it and to do something with it. Yeah. From my own personal experience, that can be hard, man. That can be really hard.
It is. And I think, it's sometimes it doesn't feel fair. I think it's important to acknowledge that. You can get feedback. You're like, oh, that's not fair. I'm really trying.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. Amen. And that's where I just fundamentally believe that leading others has to be viewed as a privilege. I hope that doesn't sound cheesy to say, but that's what it is. And you're being put in a position of power. And you have an element of control that others don't have. And when you're given that privilege and that ability to make decisions that impact other people, it's really important to realize the impacts that it has on others. And so it is a tougher job. It is a tougher job. That's why they say it can be lonely at the top. And I think there's a big part of just accepting that responsibility.
And being able to really accept it and then listen and hear it. And I'm sure there are times when you talk to leaders and they may not want to hear some of the unpleasant pieces of what you've discovered.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It can be challenging. I think a lot of times people's perceptions exist for the wrong reasons. That kind of comes back to these underlying assumptions that come about in organizations that may have been there for years. And I see this a lot with new leaders, actually. So leaders taking over in environments maybe that haven't been the best historically, and they come into a new situation and they need to lead. And it's hard because you don't start from scratch. These underlying assumptions and past behaviors and the way people feel are, they've been present for a long time. And in a lot of ways, that's not fair to a leader because they didn't do it to create it, but they do have to work through it and pay attention to it. And it's kind of accepting that reality of these perceptions exist, whether they're right or wrong, they exist. And so how do we start to change some of them?
Okay, so that naturally begs the next question. So I've done a good job. I've listened. I've gotten feedback.
Yeah.
Now it's time to do something with it. What's a good first starting place if we're sitting here listening to this and we say, I need to change the culture of my team, or I need to change the culture of my group? After you've listened, how do you execute on that?
So broad brush, without having data and knowing exactly what it is you're trying to change, I think the most important thing is focus. It's really easy, especially in these large surveys that collect a ton of data. You get all these different things that you could do, and I found it's really hard for organizations to pick one thing and focus on it. But the reality is we can only do one or two things well at any given time. And of course, when you're in the context of an organization and a business that's focused on all these other initiatives for their customers and operational efficiency and all these other things, just picking one thing that relates to your culture is really, really important. And doing that one thing and focusing on doing that better, and incrementally, you'll make a lot of progress over time. But there's an element of patience that is really helpful.
Yeah, so being focused. So first we got to be open. We got to kind of figure out what's going on, and then we got to focus in on one thing that we want to kind of work and move the needle on first.
Yep.
And would you say, is that something you stay focused to that one thing for a year, or you just kind of pick your time frame? It doesn't have to be a year.
Yeah, so at CultureIQ for us, that's one of the big things that we talk about a lot, is the importance of measuring your progress and checking in, because you want to know you're not investing good energy after bad, for example, and that the impacts you're having are and the actions you're taking are working and being impactful. So we think it's important to measure progress along the way with whatever it is you're doing, and being really targeted. So you don't need a long survey. You maybe just need 2 or 3 questions to measure your progress. And then as you start to see uptick and change, sticking with that for probably even a little longer than you think you might, than you should, to make sure it's sticking. But that's kind of hopefully that's an answer it's a way of getting around the it depends answer, because it does depend on what you're working on. Yeah.
I teach at a business school. Of course I like it depends, because I use that all the time.
Right.
So I love that. So be open, focused, and then measure. Okay, so we're gonna roll into our break. When we come back from the break, I want to pick your brain on some of the things that you all at CultureIQ have been seeing in terms of general trends across company cultures and organizational cultures. Like, are there certain things that you're seeing pop up as obstacles, or just overall just the vibe in the workplace today? I'd be curious to what y'all have been picking up on. So we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we've got David Shanklin with us even longer to talk more about culture. So stay tuned.
The right job plus the right culture plus the right boss equals workplace happiness. The number one reason people leave jobs is problems with their boss. A horrible boss can make us dread every Monday, but an amazing boss can make us so excited to work that we'd go in on weekends. Finding your perfect boss is not only possible, it's one of the most impactful steps you can take in crafting your perfect career. Visit theworkplacetherapist.com and click on guides to learn how to find and get your perfect boss, whether that means making the decision to move on or turning your current boss into the perfect leader you want them to be. Our bosses have so much influence over our work and our whole day. Working for the right boss alone can be a winning career strategy.
Welcome back from the break. This is the Brandon Smith Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And of course, we've been talking about one of my favorite topics as a culture geek. I love culture. So we're talking about culture, and I've got David Shanklin with us via Skype. And David, of course, is the head of culture for CultureIQ. And David, talk to us a little bit about, when we left for the break, I hinted that I wanted to hear what you all have been seeing as general trends. So what do you see as some general trends in the workplace as it relates to culture? either stuff that is kind of dysfunctional or obstacles, or even maybe good stuff. I'd be curious to what you guys see.
Yeah. So for challenges and trends, I don't know that's necessarily a new thing, but there is often just a disconnect between leaders and employees and what the front line is feeling. And that's certainly something that we find, and why we think it's so important to collect that feedback in an anonymous way, and then really explore it with that spirit of curiosity and how can we do better. Because
so when you say
Yep.
disconnect, what exactly do you mean by that? Is it that they're just like not actually out in the field or not actually down on the ground floor with everyone else who's doing the work, or what?
Yeah, I think, if you ever watch the show Undercover Boss on
Yeah.
on TV, and I have mixed feelings about that show for a few reasons, but at the end of the day, I love the fact that it's got the CEO in there on the front lines, and it's clear the empathy that almost always comes out of the CEO having that experience of what it's like to work in a store, or I saw one on water parks, like go in a water park and see what the lifeguards do. And I think, it kind of comes back to this listening and this empathy for each other that is so powerful within any team and within any organization.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So just a general disconnect because they get so stuck in their role, they forget what it's like to be on the front lines every day.
Yeah, and ultimately what that means is actually missing the customer experience, because those are the employees that they're touching your customer every day, and they're the ones that are interacting, and they actually, I find that our account managers, our strategists here at CultureIQ, like they know the client so well, and I do a lot of client work myself, so I'm pretty connected with it, but they have a different client base than I do, and there's a whole set of client needs that they run into, and it's so important to understand what they're experiencing with their clients, because that's what enables us to serve our clients the best, as when we're continuing to listen to that voice, which often comes through listening to our employees.
Yeah. So I'll share with you something I've been seeing, and I'd be curious to your reaction to it.
Yeah.
So one of the things I hear when I'm talking to a lot of companies is, we'll talk about urgency, and they'll talk about needing to create change and the urgency that needs to be underneath that. But then they'll come back and they'll say, yeah, but what leadership has done is they've made everything urgent. So there's like this pervasive urgency throughout the organization. You got to kind of get everything done by yesterday. And I think leadership, I see this consistently with for-profits and nonprofits. And part of that disconnect is it seems like leadership just kind of pats themselves on the back. Like, I'm a really great leader. I made everything urgent. And now people know they've got to go do stuff. When really what they've done is just create a ton of unfocused anxiety into the system and just made everyone kind of spin and just creates a heightened level of burnout. So I don't know, do you guys see any of that at all? Do you ever encounter that when you do your research or uncover that?
Yeah, all the time. And I think it speaks back to what we were talking about before the break, which is the concept of having focus. Yeah. Whether it's related to culture or related to something you're trying to execute from a strategic perspective, if you don't have that focus, people can only do so much. And it's interesting because technology probably hurts us in some ways because we think we can do more than we can, or we think that technology can make us incredibly efficient. If we look at, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but we look at, having phone and email. It's like, oh, great, that should open us up to be more flexible and be able to fit more in. But really what it means is we're just all working at 10 or 11 o'clock at night now, right before we go to bed, instead of, allowing, I think a lot of times, instead of allowing work to fit more into our lives better, we just try to fit our lives into work.
I'm sorry I wasn't paying attention. You had to check something on my phone. What was that you said? Something about distractions or?
I don't remember. I got distracted.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're exactly right. I think this guy has not made our lives better in that way. It's made focus harder because we've got stuff coming at us all the time, 24/7, just pounding us with information, and makes things that much more urgent, harder to focus. So okay, cool. Yeah, that's a tough one.
If I could, Brandon, I'm noticing the Tabasco sauce behind you.
Yes. You see
And
that?
yeah, I've stolen that a couple times. I'd love for you to share your analogy of culture, because I think it kind of tangentially relates to this element of focus
Yeah.
about how you see Tabasco.
So I use the Tabasco sauce analogy. I'm glad. Thanks for spotting that. I use it in two different ways. I use it, one, when we talk about culture, because I say that great culture should be spicy, and they should have an attracting or repelling effect. So people taste it and they go, whoa, that is not for me. Or they go, wow, I finally found my flavor. Like, these are my people. It should kind of put the cult in culture. And so you want that spiciness. But I also use it when I talk about urgency. So when I do sessions on leading change, I talk about urgency being like hot sauce. And so you want to put enough hot sauce so it stimulates a response where people want relief, but you don't want so much that you burn people's tongues. And so I almost find that today in organizations, they're just dousing everything with hot sauce. It's like everything's just covered in Tabasco sauce. And so people's tongues are just getting burned. It's hard for them to focus. So
yeah, and eventually you have no taste buds left, so it's just like, okay, whatever. I can't.
You just become numb to the whole thing. And I think that's the other piece to this too, because I love your example and your clarification on culture being not only what you do, but why you do it, and gives that a level of focus. If we get it right, it gives people a sense of focus, which is what we're going for.
Yeah.
Anything else you see in cultures when you're kind of bouncing around and talking to people, either what you see them doing that's not so good, or you see that's like working really, really well?
Yeah, so I think the elements of the best cultures that I see, and there's a book came out a couple years ago now, probably. It's called Prime to Perform. And I really like the model they put forth, and they put forth three attractors really in creating great motivation in the workplace and a great culture. And it's the notion of play, purpose, and potential, in that order, with play being the most important part. So play is just the work itself is fun to do. Purpose is there's a higher purpose and meaning in what we're doing and who we're serving. And then potential is I have the ability to grow and learn. And to me, I see the best companies really trying to take advantage of that, and the notion that work can be fun, and really trying to put people in places where their strengths shine and the work is enjoyable to do. And it's interesting, if we circle back to this concept of mindset, I see sometimes in leaders that there's just a mindset that, there's no way anybody could enjoy this work. There's no way it can be fun. So we're fighting an uphill battle because just nobody's going to like this job. And right there, to me, you're essentially done, because if you've made that assumption, there's no way people are going to find it fun, nor are they going to feel valued or purposeful when they do the work, even though there is a lot of meaning in it. So I think the organizations that are doing those three things well are really not only getting the most out of their employees, but creating the best lives for them too.
So I think all those are awesome. Play, purpose, and potential. I love that. I think I love that you also emphasize that play is almost the most important. It's also the one that's probably the most difficult to get right.
Yes.
Because it kind of hints at this idea that we can be playful, maybe even have, nicknames for each other, or play, kind of fun, practical jokes on each other.
Yeah.
But of course, anything taken too far can not be good. And so I think a lot of managers get freaked out by that and say, oh no, we've got to be professional all the time and not have any kind of collegial relationships. Do you think it's important to even have a friendship at work or friends at work?
Yeah, so Gallup's famous for this, and they get a lot of flack for their engagement question of I have a best friend at work. And if you look at their research on it continually, it's like the most highly correlated statement with engagement. And I think to that extent, what I see there is that it's really helpful for people to have one or two close friends at the office. Think about how much more supported you feel if you feel like you can bring yourself and you've got colleagues to not only have fun with, but to complain to. Work at the end of the day is still work, so there's always something you want to complain about, let's be honest.
One of my producers here, Whitney, can I complain about her to you right now? Because she's not listening, I'm sure. That's probably for another show, but yeah.
Tell us
Okay.
about your dysfunction. Yeah, so I think that's really important for people to have those relationships. As it scales across a culture, the way we think about it is we have a strategic culture dimension on exactly this. So our stance would be is that it depends on what type of relationship that you have with your customer. Does it need to be really exceptionally professional, and it's just all about showing up and getting your work done? Or does there need to be a social element? I think you talk about this with like cab drivers.
Yeah.
I think I've heard you use that example of like, you actually just want it to be really professional. Like you want to get in, you want to get to where you're going. You don't need to have, a heart to heart with your taxi driver, because you're probably never going to have the same taxi driver again.
Yeah.
So it's a very professional relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe more professional or even transactional versus relational. But then you think about maybe like a Zappos or a MailChimp, where they like being somewhat playful with their customers. And so internally, they have a more of a playful culture where they might, grab Nerf guns and shoot each other at some point during the day or whatever it is, just doing stuff to embody that. I think that's a good reminder for us to kind of match that playfulness to the kind of interaction we want to have with our customer. Super cool, man.
Yep.
Awesome. So I'm about to hit you with my last question, my life hack question. But before I do, is there anything else on culture that for those of us listening today that have a team and we want to make our team better? I mean, I got the idea that we want to be open, get that feedback. We want to focus. We want to try and find a way to measure it. We want to think about things like play. We want to think about purpose. We want to think about potential, and play being kind of the most important. Anything else you want to add to that mix?
I think for leaders, and I don't know, maybe this is the life hack, but it's also important to take care of yourself.
Oh, yeah, this sounds like a life hack to me.
I think we kind of started being a little tough on leaders and saying, hey, there's a lot of responsibility in this, and you have to accept that as a leader. It's a privilege to lead others, and it has to be viewed that way. I think that's just a fundamental mindset that makes people better leaders. And at the end of the day, you also have to take care of yourself, because if you're really stressed for whatever reason, your team is going to feel that. You look at the neuroscience, right? Like that state of stress is contagious, emotionally contagious.
Yeah.
So as a leader, you really have to take care of yourself and find whatever it is for you that puts you at your best and makes you effective. So it's how you set up your work environment in work, but then of course what you're doing outside. And so for me personally, it's really about having that balance. So being able to spend time with my family and, as you mentioned, my new son. I've also taken up the hobby of triathlon, which is debatably healthy. But I feel so much better when I've had that training session in the morning, and have accomplished that before I even start my day. And I know that it makes me a better leader, a better teammate, a better boss. And so I have to find a way to fit that in. It just makes me more effective, not less.
Awesome, David. Great summary of way to kind of summarize the whole time together. So if people want to learn more about you, where can they go? Where can they learn more about either what you or what you all are up to at CultureIQ?
Yeah, so pay us a visit at CultureIQ.com. We'd love to see you. You can, I'm on LinkedIn, David Shanklin. I don't think there are too many others out there. And then on Twitter, I'm at Leader Scientist. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you all for listening and watching. Of course, always follow us on Twitter on @TheWPTherapist, and Facebook, facebook.com/Brandon Smith and WPT for the Workplace Therapist. And of course, you can download this on iTunes. And until next week, keep up the fight against dysfunction. Have a great week and an awesome life.